Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. Brought to you by 𝗃𝗏Radiocenter.com, a Motorola value-added reseller. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization dedicated to equipping the vigilant, those men and women who stand watch, keeping our houses of worship and places of faith safe. We believe church safety and security must be a ministry first, and have engaged servant leaders who continually strive for excellence and teams of motivated volunteers that are always training. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗂𝗿 and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, churchsafetyguys.com, and on the original Church Security app. Download it today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your ministry.
Hello, welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James, and once again joined by my co-host Mike.
What's up, sir? How are you?
I am doing well. Another weekend successfully in the books, coming to a close.
Yeah, it's in that kind of hyper period after the attempted active shooter that was apprehended. So bit more, as I told people, a little bit of a slight escalation. Don't overreact. It's not everywhere. It's not a threat, but you got to be aware in that period of time following. So everybody was a bit more on edge despite that, but things are perfectly fine. And as far as I know, I didn't hear anything else in the news that went off today, hopefully. So we should be good.
Yeah, I haven't either, honestly. And we're talking about the situation in Virginia starting off. And, we've had I've seen a few news articles. And of course, it was actually, I believe it was actually John Riley that showed me an article, but shared the event with me when it happened. And we certainly got it out there and started watching a little bit of it. And it's definitely an interesting, I will say that it's definitely an interesting study to kind of review. And I've passed a video on it that our friend Marco Galbraith from T4 Tactics actually put together. He put together about a 9-minute video, and that's on his YouTube page and in our social media groups. So if you haven't watched that, I would encourage you to go watch it. And it's definitely a good, solid video to maybe play for your folks as well, if you want to use it as a training incident or training concern. I think honestly, looking at the folks that responded, it was one of those, to me, it seemed like it was one of those events where everything kind of came together the best way possible, which is certainly, kudos to the law enforcement for taking stuff seriously. Kudos to the church for responding. There was a few small hiccups here and there. But ultimately, something that we've talked about before, I've talked about it in conferences and with churches, is the importance of reviewing social media and really taking it seriously. Yeah. And that if they hadn't taken some of this individual's postings online, it would have definitely been a different outcome, because that was the tiebreaker, right? For things going well, was someone saw some social media posts and kind of scratched their head and said, wait a second, this isn't right. And took action on it. So I mean, I would encourage people to do that anyway. If you don't have a plan for social media, or someone at your church that pays attention to social media for your own page, and then also maybe those, casually glancing at those that attend the church, you really need to set that up, and you need to move forward on doing that, because that's just one pre-attack indicator that, we've talked about that before on the show, but that's just one area that churches have not taken advantage of. And you don't necessarily have to get to stalker level, but I can tell you that, within a few minutes, if you go to the right places and you look at the right stuff that's free, you can certainly get a better idea of someone's intentions and what's going on. And if nothing else, then maybe move resources to help that person and be aware and better prepared. And, I've used illustrations before on the broadcast here with that at my church, where, I took the time and looked up somebody's social media and kind of did a little bit of a backstory. And once we put all the puzzle pieces together, we saw that the story was a lot different than how it was presented. And so it really saved us in a situation where some bad things could have happened, and they didn't, thankfully, but definitely something to be aware of. But if you haven't joined us in a while, or this is your first time, welcome. Thanks for hanging out with us. Our website, if you'd like to reach out to us, is 𝗓𝗏𝑆afetyguys.com, and you can do that through our website, through the Church Security app, which is free to download on Google or iOS platforms. And we recently had another update with that, so it should be running well. But if you see any concerns or have any issues with the app and how it's running, please let us know, because we can kind of spearhead updates and repairs sometimes with that. And other than that, same old. We're gearing up for a busy season. I'm busy. You're busy.
Yep. Well, we just announced our new building rendering, the hopes of breaking ground next year. We do have the land. We're working on all the different details. So good to have the joys and struggles of working through blueprints and hey, what about this? And I mean, I've already had them at an entrance at a different spot as an emergency exit, because there was a bottleneck in a corner that would have not created a very easy spot to get out if there was a situation. So we've definitely already made some changes as a result. So good to be able to contribute.
I may be calling you before too long and saying, Mike, I need your help, because we are growing exponentially, and we've actually started talking about the possibility of finding land and building a steel structure and what that would look like and what we would do. And there's already been a little bit of discussion about, would you have a safety office? Would you do this or that? And, so we've had the I've had the office, I've designed the office, and
yep.
Now I think we're kind of moving on to a 3.0 approach, where it's more hospitality and safety versus a designated office. But
yeah, we're actually looking to co-locate with media production. So not the booth per se, or the normal spot we would typically see in many churches as far as working sound and lights, but really more of the secure area where you're kind of storing lavaliers and other sorts of equipment after you're taking down the cameras and other sorts of pieces. So somewhere that's still a secure area with low volume of traffic going in and out of. Somewhere that we can kind of, I mean, it's not meant to be a conference room, a break room, or other sorts of things. It's meant to kind of come in, hang your coat, grab your stuff, do what you need, your earpiece, your radio, whatever, and then move on.
And I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of newer structures, because if you think about it, with newer buildings and buildings that are going in, a lot of times churches are building steel buildings because they're less expensive. And that's, one of the things we were looking at is steel and wood, Amish construction type thing. And with that, do you really need somebody there? Well, with technology now, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, it was nice to have a room, where it's a control room and you've got cameras all running back there. But now with technology in the cloud, with everything, I can I can look at cameras and control cameras from an iPad, so do I really, and especially if I'm shorthanded, do I really need to be back in an office somewhere? I can easily be at a desk greeting people and still kind of monitoring what's going on and being part of that hospitality team and being in the middle of stuff. So it's certainly stuff to consider. But anyhow, we'll jump into the topic tonight. We've had a lot of churches, quite a few churches reach out to us and talk about or ask about having a positive attitude, and not only having a positive attitude, but just getting, how do you handle a situation when you're kind of run down and you're tired, and how do you take care of yourself? But at the same time, how do you keep a positive attitude for your team and a positive attitude with the ministry? And a lot of times, honestly, it is a challenge. And so I wanted, on this broadcast, I wanted to bring in our buddy, Aaron Wesley Hanna, who's been on the broadcast before, to talk about that. So welcome, Aaron. And again, thanks for hanging out with us and being willing to come on and talk with us. I'll pay you later, but
yeah, not a problem. I didn't have anything else going on, so I figured, why not?
Hey, what the true testament is when we have a guest that comes back, because they didn't just check the box, they come back and they're on again. So Aaron, I think this 3-4 times, so we every time appreciate you coming and hanging out with us.
Not a problem. I even asked James about that. I'm like, are you just guys getting low on guests or something? Or like,
well, no, what it is you're so diverse on multiple topics. You've had that life experience that I'm just like, you know what? Oh yeah, I can talk to Aaron. Now
it's
all good stuff.
Trying to remember all of it.
Yep.
Well, that's what happens when you get old.
Yeah, I know. I'm not there. I'm not to the level you are yet, but
well, Mike's older than I am, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Well, he seems to be pretty on it.
I try.
At least on the broadcasts.
Okay. Well, that's a humble facade. So
he has someone speaking in his ear.
Yeah.
No, I'm always writing. It's my notes. It's preparation and notes. It's always going in and versus shooting from the hip.
He's either writing notes, or he's guiding a dog out, or guiding a small child out, or so if you're watching on the video and you see a little head bob by, that's you
might see a little head in his space popping in.
He's over there writing down, like, what did I say yesterday?
Yeah.
What promises did I make? That
actually, no, I have notes of all 176 episodes.
That's crazy. He's more detailed. My chicken scratchings here are just notes for me. But anyhow, so jumping into the topic at hand again. Thanks for joining us. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit, because you've had a lot of different experiences with churches, and you've had a lot of different experience with life. And I think of all the people that I know, and I've heard just a fraction of your story, but I think of all the people that I know, you've dealt with some things that others haven't, and you've come through it and you're smiling. And there are times when, we all look at what's going on with life and just say, you know what, this really sucks right now. There's nothing we can do better, but how do we get out of this? How do we try and do something better? And I know there's certainly, when you're involved in church, there's a lot of things that can get you frustrated. There's a lot of things that can kind of weigh on you. And when you're in a church volunteer position, ministry serving position like church safety and security, where it's 24/7, 365, sometimes that kind of weighs on you a little bit more. But if you would, why don't, for those that maybe don't know who you are, go ahead and kind of tell some of your story and what you think of this topic and your thoughts on it. You don't have to tell the audience what you think about us, because we know what that what that looks like. Or me. I'll just say me, not Mike, because
Yeah.
Mike's a cool guy.
This isn't a stand-up gig, so I can't roast you guys.
Okay. Fair enough.
So, my background has been in public safety for almost 20 years, working odd jobs in safety and security. I'm a licensed medic, and I started running my own company. I would consult for a long while, and then I started my own company where I had a business name behind what I was doing, and it was pretty successful. Obviously, COVID happened, but I think for COVID, when we talk about COVID, I think for a lot of people, we started recognizing some of these, some of life's challenges don't have to be challenges, right? We didn't have anything to do during COVID other than to analyze our own lives half the time, right? And so that
That's
was
true.
kind of where I started jumping into reimagining myself, right? I knew that there were some things in my life that I wanted to handle and to take care of. And one of the big things that we all deal with is stress. And so I took a look at how some of my career has impacted my life. And I kind of went down this rabbit hole of a little bit of a wellness journey. I noticed that as COVID was progressing, that I was overweight. I wasn't feeling good. Different things were going on. And when you understand my family's background, it's a little bit more concerning for me because on my father's side, there's a lot of heart conditions going on. And my father passed when he was 62. My grandparents on that side passed around the same age. One of them was in their 50s. He has siblings that have already passed. And so I knew that there were things that genetically that I needed to take care of. And so I had gained some weight. Anyone that tells you that pregnancy weight isn't a thing for men, it really is. When my wife got pregnant, I gained weight, right? And it was so subtle, I didn't even know it. But there were stresses, there's weight gain, there's your eating habits and a lot of other things. And so I started with where everyone else does, fad diets, trying to do the keto stuff and everything else. And then I started realizing that it wasn't as beneficial for me. And I needed to take things slow because I'd do keto, I'd get off keto, and I would gain the weight back. And then I'd do keto, and then I wasn't feeling good. And then I would lose weight, and then I would gain weight back. And it wasn't a holistic approach. So I started simple. I started cutting out things like sugar. And then I started noticing some health concerns, and I talked to a doctor, and I got diagnosed with prehypertension. My kidney enzymes were elevated, and being young, I wanted to cut all this stuff out before it became a problem because I knew that I was doing things that were not attributing to my health. And there are things that we do as a society, and it's perfectly normal. So I completely changed my diet. I completely stopped drinking alcohol altogether. I was put on medication for both my liver and for my prehypertension, my high blood pressure, and within a year it was all gone. I had lost almost 50 pounds. I think it was like 47 pounds I had lost within that year, just by changing small things. And I started noticing that little things like sleep. We all talk about it. Like, it's important. We don't always get enough of it. And so sleep was something that I really wanted to start looking at. But then dealing with the traumas that I faced in my own life, right? having optimism, having a little bit of hope, having a curiosity to uncover what's affected me and what's not affected me, and then break those down and try to deal with those. Because what I found in my own life was I can't lead properly if I'm a mess. And if I'm not taking care of myself, no one's going to take care of me for me. And my actions directly affect those that are looking to me for advice or for information, or for those that I'm helping with in a team environment. And if I'm off, guess what? They're going to be off too. And that was a stepping point for me to kind of really try to get things under control and really evaluate what I was doing in life and how it benefited not just myself, how it benefited others. And I think when we hear this self-care stuff, we have a negative outlook on it sometimes, where we think selfishness. But again, if I'm not at my best, I can't expect anyone else to be at their best. And that's where mistakes happen. And some of those mistakes can be really crucial. When I started working in EMS, it was not good to talk about mental health. Like, you start talking about mental health, and that's your job, right? People are going to question whether or not you can do your job. And now they're really pushing for mental health to be a focal point, which I celebrate wholeheartedly. Because when you have all this stuff going on in your mind and you don't know how to deal with it, or you're not talking to anybody about it, it consumes you. And we see that really big in safety and security, because you're talking about the situation that happened in Virginia. And one of the big things that I noticed that I was doing, especially as an educator of this type of topic, was I was ruminating over these scenarios. I wasn't really doing anything other than thinking about these scenarios, how I could prevent them or how I could talk about them. I was watching videos, I was seeing images, I was seeing some of the things that people in a civilian style life wouldn't see. Maybe a CCTV camera footage that wasn't released to the public. And so I was constantly bombarded by all this negativity. And that's all I was thinking about. I wasn't taking breaks from that. And I realized that was really affecting my performance in doing my job. And it's not wrong to want to research things. But if you're out with your family and you're wondering what you can do to prevent an active shooter, and you're not enjoying the moment and enjoying that time with family, and that's all you're doing is thinking about the negative or the what ifs, then you're not allowing any room for anything else in your life. And that can lead to a really big mental break. And so we need, especially as leaders, and everyone's a leader. I don't care who you are or what you do. You lead in some way, shape, or form. If nothing else, you lead yourself. So we're all leaders, but some of us have positions where others we have to take account for. And so I had to go on this big journey, and it wasn't easy. I could tell you some horror stories about the things that I had to go through in order to really get through and see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I talked about it with an article that I wrote once. Some of this stuff nearly killed me because of self-medicating to deal with my demons. And it's a very common situation that people that are embedded in safety and security get into. And it's one that I would encourage almost anyone to get out of if they can, but do it with help, because I didn't do it with help. And that was a big no on my part.
For sure. I think you mentioned a couple of things. I want to go back to the mental health and self-care with EMS, and honestly, I say EMS, but public safety, certainly fire sees that as well. Back when I did that in the 90s, there were several instances of things that happened during my career doing that where, I was very thankful, and I still am very thankful to this day, because my dad has always been one of my best friends, and he stepped in several times and saw me probably spiraling, and kind of sat down with me and said, "Hey, let's talk about this. Let's do this. Let's do that." And so my dad was always kind of my sounding board, to be able to say, I need to talk about this. And there were things that happened, um, just bad situations where, um, interestingly to me, I think probably one of the worst calls I ever went on, one of the worst calls, certainly, I mean, people still talk about it to this day, in that community. But one of the worst calls I ever went on, when I got home, it took me about 12 hours from the time of the call to the getting to the hospital, transporting someone, getting home, everything. And I got home, and I walked in the front door, and I remember to this day, I mean, this was probably 30 years ago, but I remember to this day, I walked in the front door, and my dad was sitting at the kitchen table, and he had 2 cups of coffee, one in front of him and another one in front of an empty chair. And he's like, "Hey, have a seat." And so I sat down, and I didn't know until later he had been listening to the scanner and had heard all of the traffic, the radio traffic of what was going on. And he said, do you want to talk about it? And I said, not right now. I said, I'd like to drink this coffee and I'd like to go to bed, because I had been up like from 2 a.m. straight through, and I hadn't slept at all. And he's like, "Okay, well, drink your coffee. I'm going to go to work." And he's like, "When I come home, we'll talk if you want to talk." And so, and I mean, that's something I never forget. But I know the stigma that you're talking about, where, for a long time, and maybe if COVID did something well, maybe it did kind of open our eyes to, especially where churches are concerned with ministry and different things like that. How do you navigate this? How do you handle taking care of yourself when, even if you really want to serve, you can't, because you physically have too much going on? And I don't share a lot of, on the broadcast, I don't share a lot of my medical issues or history or anything like that. Mike hears a lot about it, because I'm usually like, and he's got a crazy story. Mike's got a crazy story too, for sure. He's had his ups and downs as his family and scary situations. But, in the last year, I think I've had probably three or four surgeries on my kidneys. I've had, I just got done dealing with gout. I'm like, I didn't even know gout still existed. And I'm here fighting this and fighting that and changing my diet and going here and doing all this and, all this stuff. But the reality is I've had to step back, and my pastor's been a good advocate of that. But he's actually even helped me kind of step back and say, "Look, I know you really want to help. You really want to jump in. I appreciate that, and I respect that. But at the same time, if you don't get yourself better here and take care of yourself, then you're going to run into something where you're not going to be able to, and you certainly aren't going to be able to help or be of benefit to your family or to others." And I think a lot of times we jump in and we look at, especially serving the church, as this, all inclusive, like, I have to do it. The church is open. I have to be there. And certainly, I mean, there's reason to. I mean, we talk about the benefits of serving, and, the physical, mental, and spiritual implications of doing that. But at the same time, you're absolutely right that I think if you don't put yourself in a sense as a priority of your health and where your mental place is, then one thing I notice is that I start, especially if I'm leading a team, I start spiraling to the point of, everything that happens irritates me. And so that's my sign. Like, I'm trucking along. Well, when the simple things start irritating me, I know, wait a second, something's not right here. I need to step back. I need to reevaluate or take a break or do something, because this should not normally irritate me, but it is. And if I don't handle this or address this now, then there's going to be a problem later on. So Mike, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think it some great points there, Aaron. I think really it's the old adage of, we got to put on our own oxygen mask before we help the person or the passenger next to us, whether that's a kid or somebody else. And with those of us that are in the nature of wanting to be helpful, being out there and being alert, sometimes we forget to put our own mask on. And I'm not talking a COVID mask. I'm talking literally the oxygen mask, like on an airplane. But really, in the sense is, you got to take care of yourself. And I mean, I see it, as James mentioned, we have our seasons of different health things here and there, and thankfully God's brought us through it. But different points. But what I was really talking about, and I opened up a little bit with it, is just the fact of being in that period after what happened in Virginia. You can see that play out with people and having conversations where there's this almost hyper vigilance. You cross over the line of being alert into a overly alert state and almost stuck there. And so I think you were alluding to it a bit, Aaron, with the idea of going to the restaurant and being focused on the active shooter. Well, that can be any number of things. That can be a news story. That can be PTSD, or really, I liken it to something we probably have all experienced a little bit of this PTSD, is if you've ever been in a car accident and then you go back on the road and you realize you're kind of hyper focused about other cars and them coming close to you. And if it was a red car that hit you, every red car is out to get you. And it can happen. So your mind plays tricks on you in that little bit of time as you're kind of healing. That's a little bit of a PTSD element from that accident. So if you're always thinking about that and you're stuck in that state, that's not healthy. And you got to get out of that state. And sometimes it takes others, or sometimes takes intervention to help snap you out of it. But you covered some of those good things right up front, kind of what you got to do. That sleep, which is certainly important. The being able to exercise and do different things. So for me, it's always been walking. Like when I reach that point, maybe not the James where irritability point where everything's frustrating, but when I reach that point where I know, like, hey, I'm out of spoons, I'm tapped out, I walk. And I'll just go for a walk out in nature and really spend an hour. Sometimes I'll throw on another podcast. Sometimes I'll just enjoy God's creation. And to me, that's where it's a chance to kind of be one with nature and really kind of calm down. Breathing, obviously, is a big part of that. Good oxygen, getting out of my normal environment, changing the stimuli visually. It's not a screen, it's nature. All those things I've found have become my reset button.
Well, I think you touched on a couple good points, because most people that I run across in safety and security, they've heard of fight, flight, or freeze, right? And so that whole system, the parasympathetic nervous system in our body, stress isn't bad. Too much stress is bad, because when we're faced with a challenge or a threat in our life, our adrenaline kicks in, stress kicks in, we become hyper focused on that threat, and then we make decisions, right? It's not bad until we're stuck in that state, like you were talking about. Right. And literally, people can get stuck in the fight, flight, or freeze state. And so they're always in a survival state, and they don't realize that they're in a stress state, right? One little thing that I used to do that I didn't realize was causing problems until I really became mindful of it was my caffeine intake. Yeah. I would drink caffeine, and it was almost like I had to have another cup. I was kind of craving it. But the more caffeine that I consumed, the more irritated I got, the more short I got with people around me. And it got to the point where I'm like, look, I need to cut this back. And I've cut back caffeine multiple times in my life, and every single time I will have aches and pains throughout my body, because my muscles have been so tense for so long with that caffeine intake that they're finally releasing. And even though that pain's a good pain, it's a symbol to me that like I've been overdoing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to figure out ways to get out of that loop where we're stuck in a survival state. And things that you're talking about, one of the things that I've always noticed, and especially if we look at the Bible and how Jesus handles things, he would go do these sermons, and he would be around hundreds of thousands of people and these large crowds, and then he would go off into the mountains by himself.
Yeah.
Right. And there was one specific time that I remember where they're like, "Where's he at?" And they're like, well, he's still out there. Right. So he's out there recharging. You know, he's we don't know what he's doing. There's talk of prayer, contemplation, or just kind of, but he's charging himself up, and he's getting out of the cycle. And our culture loves to put us in that cycle. And I hate to say it this way, but a lot of times those hypervigilant people, they're doing it out of fear. It's a fear-based response, and that gets us stuck.
I was just going to say that it seems, especially when you go down the active shooter road, like Mike and I have talked about that before, it's so easy, and I'm not discounting it. I'm not saying it's not important to evaluate and be aware and protect yourself and your family and everything. But, there's a balance there that it just feels like we get pushed out. Like we get sucked into this vortex of, the media screaming about now churches, active shooter, this is a concern, and it'll be in the media for about 2 weeks. And then, we see the ripple effect after with churches that will reach out to us and say, hey, can you come do training? Can you recommend a trainer? Can you do this? Can you do that? But the reality is it's very much fear-induced, fear-based, where it's like, okay, you still need to keep the main thing, and you still need to focus on what's important, and realizing that, I'll give you a perfect example. My wife and I had the conversation today where one of my daughters was hanging out with a friend, and her plans changed at the last minute. Now she's an adult, she's fully capable of doing, she still lives at home, but she's fully capable of taking care of herself. But my wife says to me, as we're going somewhere, going to church, she's like, man, I wish we could just like tap into her phone and see where she is and like spy on her. And I'm like, well, we can put a tracking app on her phone. Like I have that capability. But I said, at some point, I get that. Like you're worried, you're being a parent, that comes into play. But at some point too, we have to trust the fact that, we've raised her. She's a smart kid. She does, she loves the Lord. She does some amazing things. She's got a great job. She works hard. And I said, at some point in time, you kind of have to trust the process and, remove that fear, because it's not based on logic, right? We're not saying, oh, where is she, based on the logic. We're basing that on the fear of what could happen. And I think a lot of times, especially where churches are concerned, people get hung up on the what could happen versus, being prepared and continuing to do and focus. And I go back to, Nehemiah in chapter 4, where he's reconstructing the wall. He's got all of this stuff going on. He didn't stand around and worry about the folks that threatened him. He set somebody up. He gave them the job of protection and guarding the work project. And then he went back to work, and he trusted that process and system would stay in place and do what he needed it to do. And it did. And they were able to get done the project that he felt like, God wanted him to do. So ultimately, I think that, I think sometimes we burden ourselves with it. But I think, to go back to one of the things you said about Jesus always going, I actually wrote a book called Coming Back, and it kind of talks about mental health and self-care in church safety. And that was one of the things that I bring up in that book, is that, Jesus, I think it was at least 3 or 4 times, pulled himself intentionally away and said, okay, I'm going to recharge now, and I'm going to, spend time in rest and relaxation, even in some cases, even away from the disciples, where he was like, okay, I'm mentoring you. I'm training you to do this, to do my work, but I'm going to take a break from you now. So, he goes and does that. But what's interesting to me is, before Jesus started his ministry, he fasted for 40 days. And then Satan came and tempted him on the roof of the mountain, or the top of the temple and the mountain. And after he tempted him, and Jesus withstood that, he basically again pulled himself away after that trial to rest. And it actually says, I think it's in Matthew, it says that the angels came and refreshed him and brought him, food and water to refresh him, because he had been without that. So to me, again, Jesus is always the perfect example, but the fact that he went through that situation and dealt with it successfully, but then afterwards knew enough to pull himself back and rest and say, okay, physically, this is taxing. To me, that says a lot.
Could you imagine if Jesus remembered the traumatic experience he had in the wilderness with Satan, and he's like, you know what, I'm never going to go back to the wilderness again. And that's all he could think about was
Yeah.
he just kept on thinking about, there's the devil's in the wilderness, right? And so he would never have that ability to recharge. And I think sometimes we get put in there, we get stuck in so much that anything could be a warning sign, and we need to pay attention to the warning signs. But we need to also understand our own selves, right? We have to be mindful of our thoughts and our actions and our speech, because the bottom line is you're going to be better at what you do when you take care of yourself. And if you do that, what happens is that translates. It's kind of a ripple effect to everybody else around you. It's no different than that one person that you work with that comes in with a smile on their face, and like now you have a smile on their face. But the day that they don't come in because maybe they're not feeling well, or they have car trouble, and they're not there to lift your spirits up, you feel that. But we have to be mindful of those things and do just some of the basic stuff, right? Make sure we're getting enough sleep. If you look at the science community, they really don't know how much sleep you're supposed to get. It changes so often. And now it's like a range. Just do 7 to 9, somewhere in there, you'll be good, right? But also too much sleep is bad. So it's like a balancing act, right? Making sure your diet's good, as best as it can be. And I know that's a struggle for some people because prices are through the roof on some things, right? So, but just avoid the processed stuff. Start there. Start small. That's the biggest thing that I had to learn, was I would try to do these things in big chunks, and I couldn't. I had to start small. I cut out sugar, and then I moved to once I was able to conquer that, I moved to the next thing, right? You talked about Mike talked about exercising, and it doesn't have to be a big gym membership or anything like that. Just break a sweat. Do that a few times a week. Do something there. I don't know if people are familiar with this or not, but there's places out there called blue zones. And these are places where they have a large density of people that live over 100 years old. And one of the biggest ways that they exercise is a garden. Like, you don't think about gardening as exercise, but they do it. And that's their exercise. So find something that you're breaking a sweat with, you're moving around. And I think the biggest one for a lot of us is stress. That one is probably the top of the list of things that we need to manage, but it's one of the harder things to manage. And James, you talked about it perfectly. Have someone to talk to, right?
Yeah.
And then ask yourself this question: if the only thing I talk to my best friend about, or my confidant about, is the stuff that I have in my head, would they tell me to shut up? Would they tell me to stop talking about the same thing? Because if all I think about is the active shooter, or how we're not prepared for a real medical emergency, or what happens if someone has a heart attack, and we're seeing those play out in our mind over and over again, and that's all we're focused on, that's what we talk about. What we focus on is what we talk about. So if we're talking about the same stuff over and over again, then you need to make sure that you can check yourself on that, because it's real simple to listen to what we're saying. And if it's the same stuff and it's not positive stuff, we need to add some positive stuff on there. And like when it comes to sleep, people don't realize this, but you can get prescription sleep aids or even over-the-counter sleep aids. That doesn't mean you're getting good sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, that might help you fall asleep, but it doesn't mean that you're going through the rhythms every night that you're supposed to. And things
For
like
sure.
alcohol and too much caffeine can also cause those problems. With all of it, don't self-medicate. And that's a big one, because you can't watch a TV show for someone over the age of 10, and sometimes even younger these days, that doesn't have alcohol involved, right? And I'm not saying that you have to completely cut out alcohol, but don't use alcohol as a crutch to help you fall asleep or to deal with your stress, because what that does is it builds on that stress, and then you want to drink more, and then next thing you know is your doctor's looking at you and like, hey, how much do you drink? Oh, well, I don't drink that much. I only drink this much. And they're like, well, that's a lot. And you're like, well, I never knew that was a lot. Everyone drinks this much, right? And then be mindful. I know mindful is a word that gets thrown around a lot right now. You have the whole mindfulness movement, and I think some of that's skewed. But mindfulness is really about being aware of your own thoughts and your actions and what's going on in the moment. And in safety and security, we always talk about situational awareness. And it's weird because a lot of the people that I know that have a career in public safety or the security sectors, they practice mindfulness on a regular basis, and they just don't realize it, right? But we don't
Sure.
look inward to ourselves. We don't look at our thoughts. We don't look at our emotions, what triggers us. We don't even look at our own strengths. And that's a big thing. Find your strengths and use those strengths on a regular basis, but be mindful of all of that, right? And those basic principles will help you get through, and will, you can do other things for self-care, but start with the basics and do small chunks at a time, right? And the big thing that I tell people is forgive yourself. Be loving towards yourself. And you'll hear these thoughts like, oh man, you know what? I drank too much coffee today. I'm stupid. Or, oh man, you know what? You shouldn't have done that, right? If you make a mistake when you're doing these processes, don't worry about it, right? Because you can start again. And it's not like it's going to be horribly detrimental, but we try to put ourselves to a standard that we simply can't meet. And so we need to give ourselves a little bit more grace and tolerance when we're trying to change things in our lives. They have the whole 21 days or 24, whatever it is, will create a new habit. And studies have found that what it is that's the beginning phase of starting a new habit. It really takes about 3 months for a habit to be solidly formed, right? So, start small, give yourself some grace, some latitude to make mistakes, because you're going to. But I promise you, at the end of the journey, you're going to feel better, and you're going to be able to help out more, and you're going to be able to lead teams and the people around you in a more effective way. And then you can help them do the same.
I think it's interesting. There's something, and I would encourage everybody to Google it, look it up. But I found myself not too long ago, I found myself constantly like fighting in my brain over a lot of different topics, and actually ended up going to a Christian counselor locally, and I sat down with him. Great guy. And I have nothing against talking to pastors or whatnot, but I really wanted to talk to somebody that didn't know me to throw out there.
Probably
and say,
a good idea.
Hey, you know what? Here's what I've got going on, and everything. And one of the things he mentioned to me was cognitive dissonance, if I can say it right. But basically what it is a lot of times is, our brain, we're constantly negative. We're constantly looking at things and twisting it from a standpoint of the negative aspect of it, to be able to, instead of be optimistic, be pessimistic. And so a lot of times when you get to that point of just over and over and over again, that creates stress, because your mind starts saying, like, nonstop, well, deal with this, deal with this, deal with this. And if you're like me, if you're an individual that likes to be a problem solver, and you can't think of a problem or a solution to fix that problem, all of a sudden your brain is going in this endless loop where you can't get out of it. It's very challenging to stop and break out of it. And so, it reminded me of I think it was the Apostle Paul that said, take every thought captive. And that's one of the things that the counselor actually told me. He said, you beat yourself up over the silliest things. I'm not going to say they're dumb things, because to you they're important, but they're silly from the aspect of, at some point you need to stop and shut your brain off. Like, do things that you enjoy doing, like go outside, go shooting, go play basketball, go do this or that, because that'll fill up your mental tank of being able to say, hey, this is, enjoy a book, go grab a cup of coffee, whatever you need to do, but intentionally spend time doing what you like, so that when you go to contribute to others, like your family, your church, everything, you're not running on empty to do that for them. You've already got a full mental health self-care tank where you're like, hey, I took care of myself this week because I took an hour and went to the park and sat down and read part of this book, or I went and grabbed a cup of coffee, or, I went off by myself and did shooting for an hour. And that was, stress relief for me, or something like that. But the truth is, we have to be proactive in taking steps to block ourselves when we get into that place of constantly dwelling on stuff, because it's not healthy. And there are times when obviously stress can create more medical issues and more medical concerns. And so when we're constantly fighting that stuff, we're not, at some point in time, we're going to crash, and we're not good really to anybody, because we're dealing with all of that. So Mike, you wanted to jump in and wrap some stuff up?
Yeah, so a couple things there is one. I think where you were going, James, is I give credit to my father, because he kind of always said this term of stinking thinking, and was the idea you just get down this rat hole, and one thing of stinking thinking leads to another thing of stinking thinking, and you're spiraling all on the basis of something that was not true in the first place. So don't go down those rabbit holes, and if you find yourself spiraling in those rabbit holes, you gotta jump out of them. And then I think often is that you talked a bit about it, Aaron, is the idea that we often focus on the others that are coming into our congregations and our auditoriums and our sanctuaries and things as extra grace required sometimes, but we don't ever give ourselves the extra grace required at times. And we got to think about that again, back with the oxygen mask. We need our oxygen too. So sometimes that grace has to be directed at us. It's our own oxygen to kind of get out of our own way. So in wrapping, kind of some thoughts about creating a self-care plan. And Aaron, you covered a lot of really good points. I think it's great to kind of think about and really taking those small steps. But these are kind of some thoughts put together that were really, how do you create your own plan? Well, you need a plan. We talk about anytime you want to improve or get better, you got to put them in writing and figure it out. Don't just kind of get going. So first, identify your current state. What's your baseline? What's life look like for you right now? Are you in one of those seasons, as we talked about earlier, where maybe health is a challenge, or maybe a lot is going on, or maybe you're in a heightened hypervigilant state because of any number of things, PTSD or otherwise? Figure out what does your current state look like? Identify your needs and what do you value as an individual? Well, I mean, I know we value being those protectors, being helpful. But sometimes, as we've talked about in the past, sometimes the best thing we can do is step aside for the day, because we need rest. Rest is not just sleeping. Rest is sometimes stepping out of our roles, out of our every Sunday wearing the things that we do, and that's everything. That's from your everyday carry, but that's our everyday carry up in our mental state as well. When we're serving and we're being vigilant, we're carrying something. So make sure you identify what needs you have and what do you value. Ensure you're getting that sleep. Aaron talked about that. Write down your activities that make you feel good. James just covered that a bit there, but write them down. What are the things you feel good doing? What are the things you don't feel good when you do? What are things that make you irritable? What are the things that make you cranky or frustrated? You know what? It can be as simple as get a piece of red paper, get a piece of green paper, and put the good ones on a green paper and the bad ones on a red paper and stick them on your mirror. I mean, maybe it takes that, but it could be as simple as that. Maybe it's a couple Post-it notes, but write
Call
them
your
down.
friend in Texas and say, "This is really bothering me."
Yeah,
That's what I
exactly.
do. Oh,
Yeah.
hey, Mike.
Step away from the social media. No, in that sense, yes. But I mean, make time for those items that are on the green sheet and make sure that you're doing that above all times. So prioritize those. And then next, avoid the excuses. So there's obstacles out, there's things that we're all going to stumble, as you covered, Aaron. But there are things that purposely cause us to stumble that we don't remove from our path. We let ourselves stumble over them when we could have willingly removed them. So avoid those excuses, get certain things out of your house if you need to, phone a friend, as James just talked about, and then add a checklist. If you need to be a little bit more routine or consistent, write up a checklist and use that on a regular basis so that you make sure that you don't get in a negative rut, but you stay in a positive rut. So that focus your attitude of gratitude and get in that side of things. Outline your support system. Name your friends, your relatives, your colleagues, your pastors. Who are those people that you can go to, that your immediate circle, your next circle, the circle beyond that? And then if absolutely necessary, there's no shame in seeking help.
Absolutely. There really isn't. And honestly, thinking about it, and like I said earlier, if there's one thing that COVID did well, it kind of brought all of this out to our minds to say, okay, you know what? We don't necessarily have to deal with it how we've done in the past. We can start over, we can do something new, we can do something different. The greatest generation, my grandfather was in World War II and never talked about it. And it wasn't until he passed away and we found some of his service awards from the Army that we really realized what he had gone through. And he had ended up, at the time, he actually parachuted into Normandy and was part of the 82nd and was part of the team of men that went in to rescue the folks that were trapped in the Battle of the Bulge. And during that process, ended up getting shot and buried in a foxhole. Got shot in the head, actually, the back of the head. Got buried in a foxhole for 3 days, and they found his body, pulled him out, and he was alive. And so they took him to the hospital, and he actually stayed in the military for till he retired, which was actually almost right before the Vietnam War. That's how long he stayed in. But the truth is that he never talked about it, and he dealt with those really the demons of that for years and years and years, from his family to his, he died over a bar. I mean, he went to a bar every day, and that was his life for the last 20 years of his life. And so, we look at moving forward in time. And like I said, I mean, the 80s and 90s, that was great. We started talking about PTSD and different things like that. But the truth is, really, it hasn't been until now where we've said, you know what, if you're not okay mentally, we're going to stop making excuses for it. This is what you need to step back. And I'd like to see the church be reactive, or I'd like to see the church be more proactive than reactive, because to me, it always seems like we're always behind the 8 ball on trying to get, these concepts out there, that it's like, it's not a bad thing. Talking about this doesn't mean that you're a horrible person. It gives you an outlet to release stress and to be better. That's what it's about. It's about taking the time to be better, not about condemning someone for what they're struggling with. And,
Right.
that grace, extending that grace goes a long way. And I think that if we can do that as leaders, and again, like Aaron said earlier, you don't, leading a team doesn't mean you're just in charge of a team. If you're serving in this area, you are a leader. There are times where you have to step up and make the right decision. So make the right decision. And if you see a fellow volunteer or team member that's struggling with something, take the time to pour into them, engage with them, pull them aside and talk to them and be that support.
Right.
Because in a lot of cases, you might understand what they're dealing with better than anybody else. And even from a different ministry, you might understand what they're dealing with better. But if you don't stop and take the time to help somebody, who's going to? I mean, that's just the truth of it. And that should be, as we serve and as we serve in this ministry, that should be our focus. And that's true discipleship, caring about one another and, pouring into each other's lives. And if you don't do that, then, Mike and I have seen ministries where it's like, okay, let's stop, let's regroup, let's talk about this. What's not happening here? This is not happening. You're not successful because you're not doing it this way. And you're
Right.
not pouring into each other's lives. You're just basically going and running through the motions. So crazy stuff for sure.
Yeah, I just real quick, there was something that Mike had mentioned, and it was gratitude. And gratitude for me is kind of a litmus test. Um, there's one way to be able to break out cycles is to randomly just write down 3 things a day that you're grateful for. And some people have called this a gratitude journal or whatever you want to call it, but write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day. And if you start having troubles thinking of things that you're grateful for, you know that you've been thinking about the wrong things for a long while, because there are tons of things that you could be grateful for. And also too, if you ever start that practice and you're running out of things to think about, don't be ashamed of writing down that you're grateful for a house or a roof over your head, and the next day you're like, I can't think of anything. Write down the same stuff. Eventually, as you break out of the negative cycles that a lot of times we're put in, when we start recognizing the things that we're grateful for, we'll start seeing other things that we're grateful for, right?
Yep.
And they could be silly, dude. I'm grateful for a washing machine, because otherwise I'd have to be doing that stuff by hand, right? I mean, take it seriously, but the idea is write down the things that you're grateful for, and if you can think of more than 3, write down more than 3. But it will help break out of a cycle that you may be in and you may not even notice. And then that gratitude, you'll see that on your face. Other people will see that on you, and you'll start seeing life differently than a lot of times that we think that we have to do it based off of society or culture or where you live in life or what have you.
Yep.
For sure. Absolutely. And we actually, it's funny, we have a gratitude journal for church safety folks that we put together. We also have actually the first devotional that we put together, War Ready, was entirely looking at mental, physical, and spiritual. Like take care of yourself, because that impacts everything. If your health isn't good, you can't run across the church and help somebody else. So, think about that. And it's interesting because you mentioned making good habits and taking, 21 days or 24 days to do that. And we set up the gratitude journal to be 30 days. Like, hey, follow this through, do this for 30 days. And I actually gave it to somebody who I thought was having a really hard time. And at the end of the 30 days, I just gave him a copy. I'm like, brother, he used to go to my church. I'm like, I feel like God's telling me to give you this because you really need it. And so he goes through it and he comes back to me at the end and he's like, oh my gosh, he's like, that completely changed my perspective. And I said, even if you don't think you want to do every assignment, every chore, fill in everything, do it. Make yourself do it, because what it's designed to do is to give you good habits of coming out of that funk and depression and mental fog, really is what it is, and do better and be more successful. So Aaron, thanks so much again for hanging out with us and putting up with us. We always love having you on. So
who are you kidding? Putting up with you. You should
what?
Say.
What?
Well, I mean, I needed some entertainment on my Sunday night, so signed up.
Well, that might be true, putting up with me, because he never talks to you, Mike. He's always like messaging me through the week, talking to me about random things, or I'm harassing him and saying, hey, can you read this script
now
for
we're
me?
getting to the truth.
Get this book.
Real stories
read
of the
this
church
book
safety
and,
guy.
Yeah. Read this book for me and tell me what you think. So good stuff. Anyhow, again, thanks for joining us, and we'll definitely talk to you again real soon.
Thanks, Aaron.
Pleasure as always.
All right. So real quick, wrapping up, I just want to say, as always, thanks for hanging out with us. If you are new to the broadcast, you're welcome to click like and subscribe in that lower corner, and that will let you know when we have new content coming up. But as always, you can reach out to us through our website, which is churchsafetyguys.com, or you can reach out to us through the Church Security app, which is free to download, free to register. And there's thousands of dollars worth of materials that are absolutely free on there, thanks to our sponsors and our folks like you that support our ministry. But we also have plenty of books, plenty of resources that we've mentioned. Those you can see a collection of on our website. And last but not least, I will give a quick shout out. October 28th in Indianapolis, Indiana, we are doing a one-day conference. We still have tickets available. I will actually be there with John 𝗵𝗃 of the Ohio Crime Prevention Association and a few other folks. I believe John Riley will be there as well. And we'll have some folks from Brotherhood Mutual, USCCA. So some folks that have been with us for a long time. It's going to be a great day, and you don't want to miss it. There's going to be a lot of good content, and it's only $40 for the day. So that is an amazing, not to hear me, but to hear John 𝗵𝗃 as it stands, in case he's listening, because he's been listening to our podcast lately. That is a crazy value for the folks that we have there. And we've only been able to do that thanks to USCCA and 𝗃𝗵𝗃𝗀𝐴Radiocenter.com. Our good friend Billy over there. If you have any communication needs, check them out online. Fantastic company, and really go above and beyond to help folks with communication needs. So big shout out for them. And as always, next week, I believe we're actually going to be talking with John Riley. The next couple of weeks, we've actually recorded, he and I recorded a session on de-escalation, and more specifically running through some of that, what it is and what it isn't. And so we'll be playing those recordings for the next 2 weeks for you. And we will definitely be back after that. So until next time, take care. Hope you have a great and blessed week, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining the Church Safety Guys broadcast, brought to you by Vigilant Impact. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback and interaction. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams, join the discussion online, and connect with us on social media or at our website at churchsafetyguys.com. For other great ministry resources, download the Church Security app. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.